Shabbat Shalom. Scenario. You hear of a friend and they have taken ill. And so, of course, you are going to wish them Be'ivrit, in Hebrew. Refuah Shlema. Thank you. We are in the synagogue. So, Refuah Shlema. Now, why are you wishing them Refuah Shlema? What does Refuah Shlema mean? A complete recovery, right? It's that it should be a full healing. Shlema, of course, coming from the root of the word shalom. That it should be a complete and whole recovery. And technically, that is enough to satisfy the requirement of praying for someone that is ill. Indeed, the Talmud says that if you have the capacity to pray for somebody that's ill and you choose not to, that is considered to be a sin, because you are not contributing to their healing, and you must. But refuah shlema, that's not so bad. That's not such a huge tax, is it? Just when you hear someone is ill to say refuah shlema. We're all good on that, yes? However, you may have noticed that when we say the mishaberach lacholim, the full mishaberach for those that are ill, we don't just say, and there's a bunch of people sick, refuah shlema. We have a slightly longer form to that prayer. And it begins by listing many of the people that we have been meeting over the last week or two of our Torah readings, by saying, may the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah be the one that brings healing to this person. We recount the acts of kindness that God has performed for our ancestors, some of which were found in this week's Torah portion, some last week, and more in the weeks to come, as a reminder of God's power and God's compassion to bring healing. And then we list the name. Now, of course, God speaks every language, and any name is perfectly fine. But if we were trying to abide by Jewish custom, how would we phrase the name of the person that we are about to list in our prayer? By the mother's name. Now, this may seem a little strange. When you are called up to the Torah, you are called traditionally, classically, as Ploni, son of or daughter of Ploni. That is to say, for example, you are called up as Frank, son of John, right? You are called up by your father's name. Now, we have traditionally in our community added also calling up by the mother's name, but technically that was not necessary in most of our history. But it is now the common practice in our congregation. But when we are mentioning a name for healing, we would say Frank, the son of Sarah, should have healing. And again, traditionally, not mention the father's name, but mention the mother's name exclusively for the person that is ill. Why? Why mention the mother's name and not the father's name? Where is the origin of this particular practice, of this particular custom, and what should we learn from it? Well, there's a hint in Psalm 116, which you may know better as being part of Hallel, where David says, I am your servant, I am the servant, the son of your maidservant. And he is calling out to God. All right, so we have precedent that you might refer to somebody through a relationship to their mother when making an appeal to God. It's not exactly a slam dunk case, but when you read the Talmud, the great scholar Abaye says that he was taught that whenever you are making a formula, a petition of this nature, it should always be phrased through the name of the mother. Guess who taught him that? His mother. He says, my mother taught me that whenever you are making this type of phrase, you say it in the name of your mother. Now, it's actually a little unusual in more details than just that, because Abaye was raised by somebody who wasn't his biological mother. He was raised by an adoptive mother. So it is even more poignant that he would bring this in her name, and indeed he brings many teachings in the name of his mother. But frustratingly, Abaye doesn't tell us why his mother said, this is the way we do it. It is merely a statute, if you will, without explanation. And every time we get something like that in Judaism, guess what happens? People hypothesize of what the explanation might be. There isn't a single, clear, and universally agreed upon answer to this question, which means we are blessed with multiple answers to the question. So let's run through a few of the candidates and see what you like. Candidate number one, we are going to mention the ill person in their name by their mother's name because women have, on average, fewer sins than men. Doesn't mean that women are more righteous, they're quickly to point out. It simply means that under classical Jewish law, women had fewer commandments to fulfill, and therefore they had fewer things to get wrong, which would mean that they were more likely to not have a burden of guilt upon them, at least in relative comparison to the father of the person that is ill. Yes?
The mother is the caregiver from the time you're born.
Let me work through the traditional hypotheses, and then I will throw it open for additional options. So, this one, everybody agrees, women are less sinful than men because they have fewer responsibilities and therefore fewer places to make mistakes. Therefore, when we are appealing to God for compassion for this person, we want to use the best person we can find, or at least the least worst person we can find, because God forbid we say this is the son of John, and it turns out that John has been really neglecting all of his male duties, and therefore God's going to go, well, if he's the son of John, and John is a jerk, then I'm not going to heal this guy. Sound like a good idea? It's a little iffy, isn't it? I mean, after all, that would seem to invite trying to estimate which one of the parents is in actuality more righteous. And therefore, we wouldn't always go to the mother because there are, unfortunately, some women that are not terribly nice, and there are some fathers that are much better than the mother of that person, and we would want to be a little bit more careful before simply always using one or the other. Number two, you know who the mother is, but you don't always know for sure who the father is. Right? Biology being biology, when the baby comes out, before we can do DNA tests in the modern terms, we knew who the baby came out of, but we weren't entirely sure who put the baby in there. Sure, they were married. Sure, the kid looks like the dad, but you never know. You never know. And if we're going to really be beseeching God for healing for this person, let's use the lineage that we are absolutely sure about. What do we think? Good idea? Compelling? The person's lying there in bed and saying, you know, I want you to get better, but I'm just going to hint that you might perhaps be a momser, and I want to use your mom's name just in case, because that'll make you feel better. The slight air of suspicion around your paternity is a wonderful incentive to make you feel and heal faster. Refuah shlema, ya bastard. Not exactly healing words. So others say, well, wait, hold on. Category number 3, perhaps it is because you receive your spiritual identity through your mother. After all, when a child is born to a Jewish mother, the child is Jewish. And therefore, since we are engaged in this spiritual petition, we should follow the spiritual path. Fairly interesting, fairly compelling. But the consistency among us says, so if we're saying this is your spiritual inheritance, then surely any other time you are called for your spiritual inheritance, we should use this same name. When you are called to the Torah, for example, shouldn't we use the mother's name if it's the mother's identity which established the person's right to stand at the Torah? This seems to be a little incongruous. It does not seem to match how we use. Sure, we might use the father's name in cases where there is a question of physical inheritance, the inheritance of land or other items, but if the mother is the spiritual source, then certainly for other spiritual activities, we should always be using the mother's name, and we don't. And thus this doesn't work so well as a compelling explanation for why we would use the mother's name when referring to the healing activity that we are seeking. So let's throw it open now for another alternative. What was your suggestion?
The mother is the caregiver and has been since the baby was born, fed the baby, cared for the baby. So the caring or the looking after, it seems to be kind of a feminine form. I don't see that.
Well, see, we're getting into some questions here, right? The mother is, in this hypothesis, the mother is the primary caregiver. And therefore, why would that matter for healing? Even if that were true, why would that matter for a prayer for healing? Because she probably cares about the kid, and the father doesn't. Now, before you yell at me that that's a terribly sexist thing to say, that of course fathers care about their children, let's review some of the texts that we read today. When it came time for Ishmael to go, who was the one that prompted this to happen? Who said, get rid of this guy? Sarah. Why? Because he was bad for her son. It wasn't a case of pure jealousy. It's more complicated than it looks. He was bad for her son. Now, Abraham also saw that this kid wasn't very good, but Abraham wasn't sure what to do. And God said, listen to your wife. Do what your wife says. And off the kid goes. God comes along in the next chapter and says, oh, by the way, Abraham, I need you to sacrifice your son. And Abraham immediately goes to Sarah and says, guess what God has asked me to do, right? No. What does Sarah say about the entire Akedat, the binding of Isaac? Nothing. She is absent from the entire chapter. The previous chapter we see, Poked Sarah, God looks after Sarah, God is there, God gives her a child, she is celebratory, she is beaming, she is happy. In the next chapter, her kid is whisked away from her, taken to an altar, and we don't hear bubkiss from her. Why? Because she probably didn't know it was happening. Because if she had known it was happening, she was not going to go along with this. In fact, there is a midrash that says when she found out after they had left and was erroneously told that Isaac had actually died, she died. And indeed, that is why the very beginning of the next Torah portion, Chaye Sarah, is her death. That is the consequence of the belief that her son had died on this altar, is what killed her at that moment. And let's look at the Haftarah. Hopefully you were not zoning out while I was chanting, but reading along in either the Hebrew or the English. Tell me about the Shunammite woman. The woman who receives this blessed child in the second story that I read. When the kid drops dead, she goes after Elisha. Right? And she goes up to him and says, didn't I tell you? Didn't I tell you not to mess with me? My kid is dead. And Elisha says, oh, okay, my servant will go take care of it. And she says, I am not budging. By God and your soul, I will not leave. We are going, you and me, Mr. Prophet, and we are going back there. Where was her husband during all of this? The kid drops in the field, and what does he say? Take him back to his mom. He stays in the field working. He doesn't pick up his own son and carry him back to the house. He has one of the servants do it. And when she comes out after the boy has died that afternoon and says, saddle a donkey, I need to go see the holy man, he says, why? It's not a holiday, is it? He doesn't say, how's the kid? He doesn't say, why are you going off after we've just lost our boy? He's like, oh, okay. And she's like, shalom, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And he doesn't. Now, not all men are these types of fathers. Not all men have a diminished capacity to care and love and feel for their children. However, language builds idioms, it builds tropes, it builds memes, to use the modern term, of different types of behavior and activities as part of the palette of expression and of communicating deep ideas. It doesn't mean that everyone fits into the neat categories. It doesn't mean that everyone should be expected to fit into the categories. But it does mean that when we hear certain things, it is more likely to trigger certain reactions than others. For example, if I were to say, "This is the face only a mother could love," why would I reference the mother rather than the father? Because we have the trope, we have an idea that mothers are willing to put up with their children and their children's appearance more than the father. If I am asking for compassion for somebody and I say, "He is at least some mother's son," again, I'm not going to say he is some father's son, because that does not convey in English the same feeling of compassion and mercy. This is not to say that universally mothers are more caring than fathers. That is simply not true. There are far too many exceptions to that rule. But it does mean that even within English, the role of the mother has entered as a poetic form, as a type within the literature in order to evoke certain emotions. And so too throughout the Tanakh, the mother is used poetically as a symbol of God's care for us, as a mother dandling us upon her knee, as a mother who cares for her children, as the image of Zion as being a mother who is welcoming her children coming back. Indeed, that is found even within the blessings after the Haftarah. The mother is a trope within this. But now we get to the real final question. So why do we actually use this as part of our trope in this blessing? We are using the mother because the mother is the idiom for compassion and caring. And when the person is sick, they need compassion and caring. And so when we pray to God, we mention the mother because we're going to trick God into being kinder. We're going to make God more merciful by playing on the heartstrings of, think of the mother who will be crying for this child, for this person if they are sick. Are we manipulating God by using schmaltz? No. We're manipulating ourselves. When we mention the name of a person with the mother's name as their title while they are sick, we are not asking that God be more compassionate. God is infinitely compassionate and could not be more compassionate. That's what infinite means. But we are reminding ourselves that this person is sick and this person is deserving of our compassion by using a well-worn and a universally recognized within Hebrew and, thankfully enough, within English, so the sermon makes a little sense, this well-worn trope, this well-worn poetic motif that the mother is a symbol of compassion and caring so that we will have compassion for them, so that we will be kind to them, and so that we might actually do a little bit more than just pray. That yes, our prayers are important, but so is our deeds and actions built out of our compassion and mercy. And by forcing us to use the mother's name, our tradition has reminded us that we have to do more than simply say, Refuah Shlema. May this person have a complete recovery. We have to remember this is a person, a human deserving of compassion and mercy, just as stereotypically the mother would have compassion, mercy, and kindness and love upon her child. So may we as well. It is to motivate us and change our behaviors. Indeed, you will find time and time again when you scratch down through the surface of the mitzvot into their base layers, that is always a primary reason. It is not to manipulate the spiritual forces of God, which are beyond manipulation. It is to manipulate our own spirit and soul and heart and mind and feelings so that we become better people in the process. The Torah is transformative, not of God, transformative of us. The mitzvot are transformative, not of God, but of us. And if you feel that perhaps you don't have enough kindness and compassion and mercy for everyone that you meet, remember, there's some mother's son. Somebody cares for them. And if you're not sure who, then it should be you. Shabbat Shalom.